Welcome to our Let's Talk Technology Pastors workshop conversation on our Learning Commons, the way that we want to engage in continuing learning and ongoing conversations about ministry and leadership. And I'm thrilled that Andy Brubacher Kaethler is joining us for this conversation from his office at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Elkhart, Indiana. But Andy, for many of us, is not a stranger. He hails from MCEC, from Ontario, was a pastor at Bethany Mennonite Church way back from 93 to 2000. And then he was the MCEC youth minister from 2000 to 2003. And then he moved to AMBS, where he has been on the faculty there. He is the director of the Center for Faith Formation at AMBS, as well as an instructor in faith formation and on the team there in the practical ministry department. So welcome, Andy. You bring many years of ministry and experience in thinking about faith formation and how we do it. We are looking forward to this conversation because, of course, it does not need to be said that pandemic has launched all of us fully, has launched the church fully into technology. We could not have gathered were it not for technology. And so we recognize the ways in which it's aided us in our ministry. And we assume that we won't be able to move forward without technology, that there are things we will want to bring with us, but we don't want to do that without in an unquestioning way. And so we want to ask some critical questions about technology and its role in the church and in our faith communities. And so we've invited Andy to help us think about that as we think about worship and congregational life moving forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Andy. I know he has a mix of plenary, like all of us together, main room conversations and breakout room conversations. So Andy, welcome.
Hey, yeah, it's good to be here. Good to see so many familiar faces, people that I used to work with and just know from various trips. Glad to see Jim still drinking mate, and maybe there's others here that have mate on the go there. Yep. All right. So I kind of want to start by saying the first that I really became aware that that technology is a topic in and of itself in the churches. When I was a youth pastor, associate pastor at Bethany Mennonite Church, and about a few years in, back in the day before the World Wide Web, when young people were hanging out on BBSs, some kids started showing up at our youth group that weren't from our church, and so I would, start talking to them and ask them how they got here, and I'd say, well, do you know anybody here? And they'd say, well, not really. And I'd ask, well, how'd you find out about it? And they said, oh, well, I'm on BBS with this person or that person. And some of the youth from the church were inviting people that they met on these bulletin board services who were from the St. Catharines area to come to our youth group. And so they showed up at this church not even necessarily having met anybody there in person, but because somebody had invited them. And so I was originally kind of intrigued by this, this seems to be kind of a neat tool for outreach, right? And the youth were using it to invite people to come to church. And then a few years later, as the World Wide Web developed and the internet became more graphical, then we started to deal with issues, especially with the young men with pornography on the internet. And so that's when it really came clear to me that technology giveth and technology taketh away, in a way. And so there was something here that needed to be discerned. It was both a tool that we could use to further the mission of the church, but it was also something that brought things into our lives, into our worlds, into our homes that we wouldn't necessarily want there, or that caused other kinds of problems. Later on in my ministry there, I worked with somebody who had been a youth, but they met somebody online. They got engaged online without ever meeting this person, and so they wanted me to do their wedding, and I declined doing it because I didn't think that they were ready to get married, and they didn't really even know each other. And this was very upsetting for them and the family, and they ended up getting married in Niagara Falls. Of course, that's close by, and that's easy to do there. And it was it was a terrible marriage. It didn't last very long. The guy ended up being way older than he told her. He had three previous families, just all kinds of information she didn't know about him because they had never really met before. Anyway, so it was both an opportunity to connect, and there were also some pretty serious dangers involved with it that we were at that point not really well versed or experienced in dealing with. So I do find it easier to talk about technology in the church these days because we kind of collectively have a lot more experience, and especially in the last, I'd say, 4 or 5 years, people are much more ready to talk about what technology offers and what it doesn't offer. So I think a number of years ago, a lot of people were super excited about things, and the dark side, either we weren't talking about it or it wasn't quite as obvious yet. But I find today that people are well aware of both what it gives and what it takes away. I'm going to share my screen here, and all right, so you should be able to see a slide that says, let's talk technology. Is that right? Okay, and I'm gonna have to not escape it because I can't see you at all. This worked before. All right, well, I'm just gonna have to not see you and pretend that you're there. So this is just for some of you who are familiar with my family or history a little bit. This is a very recent picture of our family. The middle two persons are my daughter, Linnea, my oldest daughter, and her spouse, Dan. This was a picture from the third part of their wedding. They had a COVID wedding, so it was spread out over a year and a bit and in 3 different installments. So this was the wedding picture. My wife, Elise, and I are to the right, and our youngest daughter, Hannah, and her partner, Lorena, are to the left. So that's what my family looks like these days.
Excuse me,
Andy, oh,
Yeah.
You're showing the presentation slide, not the actual slideshow. So we're seeing your presentation screens,
Interesting. And
which is okay, but we're seeing.
That's not what I'm seeing. Okay, let me stop sharing and try sharing a different way.
it was correct the first time when you couldn't
Yeah.
see us. Yeah.
Okay, what can you see now?
Now we see the guiding questions, but just before that, there we see your family.
Okay, so you couldn't see my family before.
Yes, we could. It was just small, and the guiding questions were beside it.
Oh, okay, here we go.
This is correct.
That's my family. Here are the guiding questions. These are not ones we're necessarily going to explicitly address here right now, like in these forms, but these are the kind of questions that I bring to these conversations all the time. The first is there a distinctively Anabaptist approach to technology and digital communication in particular? And a lot of what we're talking about today is digital communication, especially as we slowly move out of the pandemic, or as the pandemic transforms into an endemic. And as Marilyn said, we are now a little better versed in using some forms of technology What does this mean moving forward? Is there a distinctly Anabaptist approach to this? The second is, at what point is our reliance on technology at best techno-solutionism, and at worst techno-messiahism and technolatry? So at what point is our reliance on technology at the best that we always turn to technology for the solution instead of some other maybe more adaptive behavioral solutions? And at worst, when do we treat technology as the Messiah, as the thing that will save us, what will save us when we're in a certain crisis or problem? Or when do we come to worship technology? When does technology itself become the object of our worship? And I see there that I did not spell technolatry correctly. And then the third question is, pretty much everybody in the Mennonite Church would say Zoom worship or YouTube worship is second best to worshiping in person. Most people I know would say that. So the next question then, or the third one, is at what point is second best so far from first best that it's worth our time and energy in pursuing it? So these are open questions in my mind, although obviously I'm going to hint in certain directions. So the presentation, or time together, has two main sections. The first part, we're going to talk about some of the approaches that I think about when we think about technology in the church, including a couple of critical theory ideas, philosophy of technology ideas, theology of technology ideas, and social and environmental justice ideas. And then move into thinking about what does it mean to be faithful curators of Christian worship and online relationships. But before we do that, I want us to break into breakout groups here and just spend a few minutes in groups of 3 or 4, or however Al has set that up, to talk amongst ourselves. What have we experienced and observed about what it means to be the church in the last couple of years, when most of us have been worshiping or meeting in some form of online context? So what trends are you observing about, and the way I phrase it is attendance and engagement. So who's there and how are they there, that you've observed over the last 2 years? And then, so that's kind of part one. The second part is, what conversations are you and your church's congregations having about the future of digital church? So where are we at in the state of this conversation? So I would say in our small groups, let's take about 6 or 7 minutes to do this. Al will give you the 1-minute warning when we're ready to come back to the whole group to talk about these two questions. And just be mindful that this isn't a lot of time, and as much as possible, see if you can hear from everybody. Obviously, that means less than a minute per person. All right, Al.
Well, that's a problem, isn't it?
This meeting is being recorded.
Well, group 5, I remember what group we were. Group 5, we were talking about how many of us had more people in church during COVID on Zoom than we would regularly.
We talked about that. Group 1 talked about that as well. And sorry, we're group 2. We talked about that as well. We also talked about the difference between live stream and Zoom. Mm-hmm. And it's different. It's very different in the sense of participation and engagement.
Lynn, can you just say a little bit about that? What differences you see between them?
Okay, I can't talk about this without giving my personal opinion. Okay, so what I'm giving you is my personal perspective on this. Live stream feels like I'm just watching it. Zoom feels like I'm engaged as a person and as a human being. That's my perspective on it. And Zoom offers the opportunity. What we do with our live stream now is that we have live stream for the service, but then afterward people can join a Zoom conversation group if they want to. So we've tried to blend both. But the worship time is quite distant with with live stream.
We tried the Zoom discussion groups after. I mean, we've been live streaming for years before the pandemic already, and the Zoom just never took off. There just wasn't a lot of interest in it, 10, 12 people, but so we dropped that.
The churches I'm part of, we've been doing Zoom worship services, and that seems to have been significant for folks. But I know my wife's church, which is roughly the same size as, but she has very little tech support, and so she's found it much easier to pre-record this when they've been not in person. She's pre-recorded the services and then I think done what, like Lynn was saying, gathered together for sharing time and prayer afterwards. So I think that's part of the equation is what are you capable of supporting?
All right, thank you folks for reporting in there. There's a few themes that have popped up here that I think will be addressed explicitly or implicitly as we move forward. And I'm thinking, even particularly about the comment that Glenn just made about it kind of depends on what support that you have, what you're capable of doing as a congregation. That makes a big difference, but also what people are used to or what has worked, what draws people in. I think that was Jim's comment. So we'll pick up on some of these themes here. So I'm going to share my screen again, and all right, can you folks see my screen that says critical theory? You'll have to.
Yes, you can.
Okay, good. And is it the full screen or is it my presentation slide?
It's your presentation slides.
Okay, so let me try that again. There we go. Okay.
Yep, that's good.
So one of the approaches that I want to just very briefly introduce and use is the critical theory approach. I hope you all aren't listening to too much American news, but if you're listening to some, you'll know that critical race theory has been a big bugaboo issue around here. We're dealing with it in Indiana. Currently, there's legislation in the state house to restrict what teachers can say or not say about critical race theory, mostly restricting what they can say. So they're being banned from talking about critical race theory at all. So I want to, if that's your understanding of critical theory, just kind of step back from that a little bit and think a little bit more broadly. Critical theory aims to understand and change society, paying a special attention to power in politics and the media. A term that gets used sometimes in critical theory is the notion of a technocracy. And so critical theory is often critical of or explores, tries to better understand what a technocracy is and how it works. And a technocracy is basically a political and social system where problems are solved by those with technical expertise. So not technical being used a little bit more broadly here, like I'd say specialized, or kind of thinking about scientific tools, not just digital technologies and expertise, but that would be part of this. In critical theory, there are often three kind of main groups that are talked about: the elite, the managers, and then the masses. In critical theory, one of the problems I think with it is that the elite are just kind of like out there. They're usually invisible. We might give them names today, like Jeff Bezos, right? Or people like that, right? But the elite can be also like the wealthiest 1% in the world who have a lot of wealth and a lot of influence, but we don't always know who they are or how they're working. And then there's the next group. These are the managers. The managers are the ones whose job it is to implement things in the technocracy, and they're typically the technocrats. They're the ones who have expertise, and their job is to do it, not necessarily to think about why they're doing what they're doing, but to think about how they can do what they're doing more efficiently. And then the larger group is the masses, and these are just the hoi polloi, the average person who is a consumer of these in the technocratic society, of consumer of devices or of services, and especially of entertainment. And you'll recognize this as being a little bit of a Marxist analysis, because there's Marxism influenced critical theory. But critical theory says, I think it's helpful because it asks, where is the power and what is going on in societies? How are we being formed as people to accept that this process is the right process? Much of my PhD studies and thinking here at AMBS on technology has revolved around the philosophy of technology, and especially philosophy of technology as it intersects with a theology of technology. So when I think about technology in the church, I appreciate the framework that Albert Borgman provides of thinking of, there's three different approaches to technology. One is that technology is neutral. Technology is neither good nor bad. It's the user that makes it good or bad, or uses it for good or bad things. So dead German philosophers like to talk about hammers for some reason. I don't know why they liked hammers, but they talked a lot about hammers, right? And so using a technology neutral approach, they would say, a hammer isn't good or bad. If you can use it to build a house or to bash somebody's head in. And you make it good or bad based on how you use it. But the technology itself, the hammer itself, is neutral. The hammer doesn't make you bash a head in or build a house, right? It's neutral. Another view on the other extreme is sometimes called the substantivist view, or the idea that technology has an agenda. So thinking about hammers, the hammer is happiest when it's hitting, and it may not care whether it's hitting a head or a nail. The hammer is for hitting. And when I have a hammer in my hand, I become a hitter, right? That's my identity as one who hits. That's what this tool is for. So this tool has an agenda, and that agenda affects me. And I think it is kind of true. Every once in a while, when I pick up a hammer in my home, I tend to go around the house and look for nails that need to be pounded in, or I pick up a screwdriver and look for things that, hinges that need to be tightened, things like that, right? So, I mean, I get that a little bit as well. And then a third approach might be to say that they're mixed. They're both of these. And that's the kind of approach that I want us to think about, is that technology has agency in and of itself, but we do too when we use it, right? So they do influence each other. And so we live in a world where the assumption is often that technology is neutral. And the NRA, the National Rifle Association, for example, they say this all the time: guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? The problem is that there's a clear correlation between the presence of guns in communities and the number of deaths in these communities, right? So clearly, in my mind, it's some of both, right? I think it's naive to take purely the technology neutral position, and I think it's giving too much agency to technology to take purely technology has an agenda approach. So I think we need some of both of them. The other thing that Albert Borgman says that I think is really helpful is that technology almost always promises efficiency. And efficiency is usually faster, easier, safer, and more ubiquitous, more portable, right? You have just any advertisement on TV, especially for cars or gadgets or whatever, emphasizes any one of these things, or sometimes all of these things, right? Cars are often advertised for their safety ratings. This is probably more true a decade ago than it is today. Today it's off-roading, right? Like whether it's Honda's new commercial series or the Subaru series, right? It's about these cars have no limits. You can take them anywhere, right? They're ubiquitous in terms of where they can go. When gas gets expensive, as it's going to get now, all of a sudden we're going to hear more about fuel efficiency in cars, right? So this is how technology promises to make our lives better by making things faster, easier, safer, more ubiquitous. And another way of thinking about efficiency then is that it requires less investment on our own self into the use of them. Another thing to remember here from the philosophy of technology is that technology is a system. It's not just the gadgets and the devices we use. It's not just the Zoom software that allows us to do this or the computer that we're using it on. Technology is the whole system. Now, we're not always aware of what we're talking about when we're talking about technology because we use it in different ways. For most young people, young teenagers especially, technology is something that didn't exist 5 years ago, right? Like, you know, if I used it as an adult, well, then it's not technology, right? Because old geezers use it, right? Technology is new stuff, exciting things like that, right? But really, technology is lots of things. Technology simply is, in one hand, it's extension of any human capacity, right? My glasses are a technology, and they extend my eyes, right? My clothing is a technology, it extends my skin. My shoes or my car are technology that extends my legs and my feet to move. So on the one hand, technologies always extend a human capacity. But on another level, technologies have to be part of a whole system. They require structures, political structures, economic structures, social structures, by which they are worth investing in and producing and consuming, but also systems of logic, like ways of thinking by which something like this makes sense. So I don't know if anybody has seen the movie from, it's at least 20 years old now, maybe 30, The Gods Must Be Crazy, right? This is a great example of like the Coke bottle as a technology that it made no logical sense in this fairly remote indigenous African community, right? It was just an object. They thought it was an object of worship or something to fear or whatever, but they didn't have the social structure by which it made sense, and they didn't have the logic or way of thinking to understand what a Coke bottle meant. And so it became very disruptive. And so the whole movie is based on the quest of this one man to throw this bottle off the edge of the earth because it was bringing all kinds of problems to this community, right? So that's an example of how technologies are logic, and a Coke bottle is just a very, very simple technology. We have different kinds of relationships with technology. And this idea here I'm getting from a guy named Don Idy. Technologies help us interpret things, right? And I'm going to use my glasses as an example here. So I see the world through my glasses, right? My glasses help me interpret the world. It's a very different world that I see when I take my glasses off than when I have my glasses on. So I use my glasses to read the world, to see what's going on around me. In the morning, however, when my glasses are on my bedside, they're something else. And especially when I'm fumbling around trying to find them, my glasses are the other. They're not part of me. They're very separate from me. And I have to struggle to find them to get them on my head so I can see the world. So that's called the alterity relationship, glasses or technology as other. For most of the day, my glasses are part of my background. They're comfortable on my head. I can see, I don't think about them, right? I'm not aware that I'm wearing them. I'm not aware that they're helping me interpret the world. They're just their background. They're there. I'm not conscious of them. And then the fourth kind of relationship we have with technology is what's called the, actually it's not horizontal, it should be horizontal. That was an autocorrect thing that didn't work. Horizontal, or the potential. Technologies help us see beyond ourselves and beyond our capabilities, where we're at now. They help us see the horizon, expand the horizon and discover it. So maybe with glasses, I mean, maybe extending it to like a telescope or a microscope or something like that, right? Glasses technology help us see beyond the world that we can see where we're at now. So we have all of these relationships with technology, but we're not aware of all of them at the same time necessarily. In fact, we can concentrate on one, but when we concentrate on one of these, we're typically not that aware of the other, right? Kind of relationship. So I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Necker cube, but it reminds me a little bit of the Necker cube. This is an optical illusion. There are various ways of looking at this cube and seeing which is the front and which is back, or which would be the open part and which would be the closed part of pretend it's a box. When I look at this, there's only, naturally, there's only one way I see it, and that's where the opening of the box is to the bottom and the left. But there's another way to see it, and the only way I can see it the other way is to kind of relax my eyes. And then I can see it where the opening of the box is to the right and top. Normally it looks like it's in behind to me, but there's another way of looking at it so that it's the right and the top. I can only see it one way at a time. And when I'm looking at it a certain way, it's pretty stable. But I can't see the box both ways at a time. But this slide here shows how there are different ways of seeing the box. The one on the left is with the opening, kind of the bottom left, and the image on the right is the opening at the top, top right. Bottom left, top right. So there's different ways of seeing that, and I can see it either way. I just can't see it both ways at once. And I think this is an interesting example of how technology works, because we're often only aware of one relationship with technology at a time. And when we're in that mode of relating with technology, it's pretty stable, but we don't realize the other things that are going on. It's really hard to be mindful of the various other things. So we're going to break into groups again and think about some of this philosophy of technology stuff in our groups, and talk about two main questions. Thinking about these different relationships with technology reminds us that every day we interact with many different kinds of technologies. Some are super, super new. They didn't exist 10 years ago or 5 years ago. And some technologies that we interact with are thousands of years old. And in our daily life, we don't necessarily think about which is which, and they all kind of work together. But I think a really interesting exercise is to think about our worship space, the sanctuary. And for those of us who have not been in that space for a while, this is a very different kind of question than it might have been a few years ago when we were in there all the time. But in groups, I would like you to think about your congregation. What technologies in there are more than 150 years old, right? So the kind of technologies that were before electricity, before microphones and speakers, before that. So something like a bench or a chair, right, is a very, very old technology. We have them, but there's others. What technologies are part of our lives in our worship experience that are between 150 and 30 years old, right? So that existed in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when many of us would have been alive, but not in the last few years. And then what are the newest technologies? So that's one. Just name a few in each of these categories. And then think about one of the newest technologies in your sanctuary, or I guess if you want to include your online worship experience together. Think about these in terms of the questions: how does it help us interpret the world? How does it other each other and the world? Like how does it objectify those things, make them separate from us or distant from us? When is it in the background? When is it something that we're pretty oblivious to? And when and how does it open up the horizon of possibility? What's the future of this? What new possibilities does this technology bring us that we didn't conceive of 10 years ago or 15 years ago? All right, so Al, can you get us into the breakout rooms? And he will put the questions in the chat again if he hasn't already.
So the chat has the questions. How much time?
Let's take 5 minutes for this. We are not going to spend time checking in with each of the groups this time, but I trust that part of what you were able to see is that every day we work with, we live in a world where there are technologies that are both really current and really old. And so this process of thinking about what technologies we use or don't use, or what effects they might have on us, our worship, our relationship, this is not new. We've been here before, and Anabaptists, Mennonites have a history of being skeptical about technology. Although that has kind of waned in the last century or so, we've become pretty quick, ready adapters of new technologies. I think there's something that's still maybe a little bit part of our theological DNA that says it's okay to stop and ask not only how should I be doing this, but whether I should be doing this, or what is technology giving us and what is technology taking away. So in the chat, you should find a list of 8 points that I have come up with for addressing what might it mean to be a faithful curator. I use the word curator not neutrally. Curator in my mind is both a positive and a negative term. A curator technically is somebody who decides, like a curator of a museum is somebody who decides what people see and what people don't see. So a curator has a lot of power because they decide what is important. They can set the agenda. Typically, museums will have far, far, far more items than they can ever have on display at one time. So the curator is the one who says, this is what's important for us now, or this is what's important, usually about telling a story about who we are as a people. So museums are often run by countries, by nations, and they're used to support, sometimes fabricate, sometimes support a certain narrative of the people of that area, right? So the curator tells a story and decides who gets to be, what part of the story is being told or shared, right? So this is both something positive and I think negative in the sense that there's a lot of responsibility, and we don't often think about what it means to be a curator in the church, like of worship experiences. And I think one of the things that Zoom worship has helped us be aware of is that it really makes a difference whether you're worshiping on YouTube or on Zoom or in person or in a wild church, right? Out in a bush, right? So in the chat, you'll find the 8 comments, and I'll just read through them and give some ideas about each of them. And then that will take us right up to 3 o'clock. I am happy to hang out with anybody else who wants to talk more about some of these topics and these issues. All right, so the first one is, what are the risks of technological mediation for worship and for relationships? I think one of the risks is that whenever we let technology mediate our worship and our relationships, we are reversing or undoing, or at least putting on notice, one of the things that's been really important for Protestants since the Reformation, and that is the notion of the priesthood of all believers. One of the key theological movements of the Reformation is that we did not need the priest to mediate our relationship with God. Jesus is the mediator, is the only mediator. We didn't need a priest to do it. So I'm kind of curious now, when Protestants have rejected this notion of the priest as being the mediator, but we gladly let technology be that mediator pretty uncritically, right? So what does it mean to let technology mediate this? What does this mean for this Protestant commitment to the priesthood of all believers? Technology changes language. And so we talk about community, online community. We talk about communication. We talk about friends. We talk about things like church. But these terms mean different things when we use them online, right? Facebook is all about community, but the Facebook community and the community that I grew up in a church or in my neighborhood, those are very different kinds of communities. When I friend somebody on Facebook or somebody friends me, right? That means that's something pretty different than when Jesus says, I have called you my friend, right? That's a very different understanding of friend and friendship. And so when we use these words that are technologically mediated, they have the potential to change our theological meaning and understanding of things. And the third idea here is that technology covers things up, both literally and figuratively. And this is the role of the curator. The curator can hide some things and can reveal some things. And that's all part of telling stories. And so sometimes we use technology to hide behind things, right? Whether we have our camera on or off in a Zoom meeting, it does say something. I don't always know what it means. It could be somebody still in their pajamas. It could mean that they've got spinach in their teeth, or I don't know what it means, but it does mean something. It means that they don't want to be seen, right? So that we're hiding something, right? In a way that when you were worshiping in church together, we can't hide that, right? If you have spinach in your teeth, everybody gets to see it when you're singing 606 or whatever it is. I think the second one is just to ask, does it literally bring us together, right? The theological commitment of the Anabaptist Church is the incarnation, that in Jesus, God, in creation, God affirmed human beings. When God made the world, God made humans and said, this is good. And this is reaffirmed in Jesus Christ, right? And Jesus is God's affirmation of our bodily existence. And so bringing us together is really important for the identity of the church. Jesus was not just God's way of communicating God's love and the good news because the internet hadn't been invented yet, because social media hadn't been invented yet, because Zoom hadn't been invented yet. The incarnation is God's chosen and enduring strategy for worship and witness, for formation of children and families, and for evangelism. If you want to read a little bit more about that, I have an essay coming out in Conrad Grebel Review. The next essay, or the next issue, is on technology, and I have a piece there on ecclesiology and technology where I expound those ideas. But we can use technology to bring us together for communication, for invitation, and it does form a kind of community. I think the question is whether it replaces that incarnational community or whether it can bring us into that. The third is, when do we imitate bodily gatherings online, and when do we do something specific? This is something I've learned over a number of years teaching online, is that there's a pretty different pedagogy that's involved with online teaching. At first, we all tried to just say, okay, now what do we do in class? What works in class? And then what does that look like online? How do you mimic that online? But actually, online teaching and education, and I think this is true of online worship, can be something a little bit different too. So if we're committed to the incarnation, what do we do that kind of with online stuff that says, okay, we're going to try and mimic in-person gatherings, right? So when we have Zoom meetings, we might have sharing, but when are the times when that doesn't work, right? When actually Zoom worship or online worship is kind of its own thing, and we need to do something different with it. The fourth is, what are the short-term benefits and what are the long-term dangers of doing this, right? I think the short-term benefits that many of us have noticed, there are people who have been part of our congregations that maybe weren't part of them before. My congregation, we accepted a new member who's from Ireland. Since the pandemic, this person wanted to worship in an Anabaptist community because they had heard of Anabaptists. There was none around where they were. So they were surfing around online and they started watching Belmont Mennonite Church worship services, and then they wanted to become a member, right? Not a single person in our church has met this person like face to face, right? But they're now a member of our church. So that's I think, a short-term benefit, but you can't have a whole church, you can't have a whole congregation that's people dispersed, at least, and not do the kinds of things that we have done in the past as Anabaptists and Mennonites. What loss and harm happens to the most vulnerable globally and locally? I mean, I know there are people who don't have good internet, so they couldn't connect to church, right? Or they don't have devices. My wife is a school teacher, and in her school and a lot of schools around here, they've gone to one-to-one devices to students, right? That's great when you're in school, but she has a number of kids who their families don't have the internet at home, right? So when they have e-learning days or during the pandemic, they could do absolutely nothing because they didn't have the internet. Some of the libraries started to check out internet stations. I'm not sure exactly how they did this, but you could check out these devices that would connect to the internet and your device. That worked for some people, but not for everybody. So even when we have these technological adaptations, there are still people who are left out of them. So there are both people who are included that weren't included before and people that are left out. How do we weigh those? I think those are important questions. The next one, what's good enough? I think we all need to develop a theology of good enough. How do we know when we have enough technology to do what we need to do? How do we know when we have too much? One of my observations as a Mennonite is that we tend to spend about half as much as we should on sound systems or video systems for what we want them to do, right? So we want them to function like a $10,000 system, but we're only going to put in $5,000, right? And then we'll be frustrated when they don't work, right? Sometimes maybe that's okay. I think we need to notice when technology isn't working, because that moves it from kind of that background relationship to a foreground relationship where we're aware of how it is mediating our relationships. Does it change our level of investment? My observation is that many have found, especially YouTube churches, a lot more work for some leaders, for pastors. They put a lot more time into preparing the worship service, and it's a lot less work for congregants who can kind of watch it when they get up. They don't have to change. When we were doing Zoom church, my wife and I tried to figure out how many different ways we could do church. So one morning we did it in the pool. One morning we did it in bed. One morning we did church while we were eating breakfast, like all kinds of ways, right? So, I mean, we kind of we made it a little bit fun, but a lot of them were a lot less investment on our part. But I know, because I was involved with a few services, and I know the pastors, that the pastors put a lot more work into these services than they would have otherwise. So for some, it's more work. For others, it's less. It can produce this kind of consumer mentality that it's, we can do it when we want, if we feel like it. And often, some people never got around to doing it. Finally, the last question is technology shaping us, and is it shaping us to embody the good news? So if we have this commitment to the incarnation, how is it shaping us to be the kind of people who are able to share the good news in both word and body, word and deed? Is it shaping us to be a people of patience or a people of impatience, right? Is it shaping us to be resilient, or is it shaping us to be reticent? Is it shaping us to keep looking for technological solutions when there are problems, or are there some adaptive solutions, behavioral solutions that make sense instead of this? I'm reminded here of the quote by Winston Churchill, who said, "We shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us," right? And so I think it's with Zoom technologies, we've developed these technologies, we implement and use these technologies, and then they continue to shape us moving forward in ways that we may not be aware of. I recognize it's a few minutes after 3 o'clock here, so I'm going to pause. Like I said before, happy to hang out with anybody who wants to talk about these ideas further, and more specifically about what it means to think about them specifically in terms of Zoom worship or worshiping online going forward, or any other ways that as churches we are thinking about, maybe struggling with, curious about what it would mean to keep using these technologies in our churches. Thank you all so much for your time. It's good to see everybody. And all the best as you move into the next phase of the COVID pandemic, however that's going to look, hybrid or going back in person or staying online, whatever that is.